was folding laundry on a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. It was Hannah, my best friend since college. And the second I picked up, I knew something was wrong. Her voice was shaky, almost breathless. "Sam," she said, "he's lying to you." I stood there with one of my husband's shirts still in my hands. "What are you talking about?" "I can't explain over the phone. Can you meet me right now?" There was something in her tone I'd never heard before. Hannah didn't panic. She was the calm one. The one who talked me down whenever I overreacted about anything. If she sounded like this, it meant something. I told her I'd be there in 20 minutes. I grabbed my keys, didn't even change out of my sweatpants, and drove to the little coffee shop near her apartment in Riverside. The one with the crooked blue awning we'd been going to since our 20s. My hands were tight on the steering wheel the whole way. I kept running through everything in my head. My husband, Mark, and I had been married almost 9 years. We had a good life, a small house in a quiet neighborhood outside Sacramento, 2 kids in elementary school, a golden retriever named Biscuit who barked at literally everything. Nothing about our life felt like it was hiding secrets. When I got to the coffee shop, Hannah was already sitting at our usual table by the window, both hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from. She looked up at me, and I could see she'd been crying. "Hannah, you're scaring me," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "What is going on?" She took a breath. I wasn't going to say anything. I told myself it wasn't my business. "Say what?" She hesitated so long, I almost reached across the table and shook her. Finally, she said, "It's about the business trip, the one Mark said he was on last week." My stomach dropped a little, but I kept my voice steady. "He was in Denver for a conference." "What about it?" Hannah looked down at her cup. "I don't think that's where he was." For a second, I almost laughed because it sounded so small compared to what I'd been imagining in the car. "Hannah, I saw his flight confirmation. I dropped him off at the airport myself." "I know," she said quietly. "That's what's confusing me too." She finally looked up at me, and her eyes were full of something between guilt and fear. "My cousin works the front desk at a hotel here in town. Not in Denver, here. And she swears she saw him checking in Thursday night." I sat back in my chair, the noise of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, people laughing near the counter. It all seemed to fade into the background. "That doesn't make sense," I said slowly. "He called me from Denver that night. I heard the hotel noise behind him." Hannah reached across the table and took my hand. "Sam, I really hope she's wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I couldn't sit on this and not tell you. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Mark, listening to him breathe, wondering how someone could sound so calm, sleeping beside a lie. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I waited until he left for work, and then I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and pulled up our credit card account. My hands were shaking a little as I scrolled through the charges. Gas station in Denver, Thursday morning. A restaurant charge, also Denver, Thursday evening. Everything matched exactly what he'd told me. For a moment, relief washed over me so fast I almost cried. Hannah's cousin had to be wrong. People mix up faces all the time, especially at a busy front desk on a Thursday night. But then I kept scrolling, and I saw something I'd almost missed. A small charge from a coffee shop, right here in Sacramento. Thursday morning, 8:14 a.m. The same morning he was supposed to be boarding a flight to Denver. I stared at it for a long time. Maybe it was a subscription. Maybe it was something automatic. I told myself every excuse I could think of because the alternative felt too big to hold. I called the coffee shop, and the woman who answered was kind enough to check her system. She confirmed the charge had been made in person, not online. Someone had physically been standing at that counter that morning. I sat there with my phone in my hand for a long time after we hung up. Our son's backpack was still by the door where he'd left it after soccer practice. Biscuit was curled up under the table, snoring the way he always did after breakfast. Everything around me looked exactly the same as it had the day before. And yet nothing felt the same at all. I thought about calling Mark right then and asking him directly. Part of me wanted to, but something held me back, and it wasn't fear. It was something my father used to say to me growing up, back when I was in high school debate club. He always told me, don't ask a question until you already know most of the answer. Otherwise, people will just talk their way around it. So instead, I called Hannah. I checked the bank statements, I told her. Everything from Denver checks out, except one thing. I explained the coffee charge. She was quiet for a moment. "Sam, I don't want to make this worse than it is. I know, but I need to understand what's going on before I say anything to him." That afternoon, I picked up the kids from school like it was any other day. I helped with homework, made spaghetti for dinner, listened to my daughter tell me a long, complicated story about her friend group at recess. Mark came home around 6, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my day was. "Fine," I said. "Same as always." I smiled at him the way I always did. But inside, for the first time in 9 years of marriage, I realized I was looking at my husband and wondering who he really was. For the next few days, I watched Mark more closely than I ever had. Not in an obvious way. I still made breakfast, still packed lunches, still laughed at his jokes at dinner. But I noticed things I never used to pay attention to. The way he'd take his phone into the garage when it rang. The way he'd close his laptop a little too quickly whenever I walked into the room. Small things. Things that could mean nothing or could mean everything. On Thursday, exactly a week after the trip, I told him I was taking the kids to my sister's house for a sleepover so I could get some things done around the house. It wasn't a complete lie. My sister really did want to see the kids. But what I actually wanted was time alone to think. And maybe, if I was honest with myself, time to see what he'd do with an empty house. I dropped the kids off around 5. Then instead of going home, I parked a block away and just sat in my car for a while, feeling ridiculous. I wasn't a private investigator. I was a mom who packed lunches and coached my daughter's soccer team on weekends. But I couldn't stop thinking about that coffee charge. Around 6:30, I finally drove home. Mark's truck was in the driveway. When I walked in, he was at the kitchen table with papers spread out everywhere, and Biscuit was lying at his feet. He looked up, surprised. "I thought you were staying at your sister's tonight. Change of plans," I said, watching his face carefully. "What's all this?" He hesitated, and for a second my heart sank, because I was sure this was the moment everything would fall apart. Then he rubbed his eyes and said quietly, "I wasn't going to tell you yet. I wanted to have it figured out first." I sat down across from him, my hands cold. "Tell me what?" He slid one of the papers toward me. It was a printout from a real estate website, a small building downtown with a for lease sign in the window. "The Denver trip wasn't really a conference," he said. "There was a conference, but that's not why I stayed the extra day. I met with a business consultant about opening my own shop. The one I've talked about for years, remember? Fixing up old furniture, doing custom woodwork." I stared at him, trying to catch up. "The coffee shop charge. Thursday morning." He nodded slowly. "I flew out later that afternoon. I had a meeting first, here, with a contractor about pricing. I didn't want to tell you until I knew if it was even possible, because I didn't want to get your hopes up over nothing. I've said I was going to do this for 6 years and never followed through." I sat there, feeling something between relief and confusion, still not entirely sure I understood everything. Mark reached across the table and took my hand. "Sam, I promise you, there's nothing else going on. I should have just told you from the beginning, instead of trying to surprise you." I looked at him for a long moment, wanting so badly to believe him, but knowing there was still a piece of this that didn't fully add up. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Biscuit shifted under the table and let out a long sigh, the kind that always made the kids laugh. I looked down at the printout again, at the little building with the crooked for-lease sign, and I thought about how many nights over the years Mark had talked about wanting to build something of his own, always followed by a shrug and a joke about how the mortgage wasn't going to pay itself. "Why didn't you just tell me you were meeting a consultant?" I asked. "You've never hidden anything from me before?" He looked embarrassed, the way our son looked when he broke something and tried to fix it before anyone noticed. "Because every time I've brought this up before, it never went anywhere. I didn't want to get excited in front of you again and then have it fall apart. I wanted to have something real to show you first." I thought about Hannah then, about the fear on her face in that coffee shop, about how sure she'd sounded. I picked up my phone and called her right there at the table. When she answered, I said, "It wasn't what we thought." I explained everything, the meeting, the shop, the reason for the extra day. There was a long pause on the other end, and then she let out a breath. "Sam, I'm so relieved. I was scared I'd ruin something by saying anything at all." "You didn't ruin anything," I told her. "You cared enough to tell me the truth, even when it was hard. That's what real friends do." After I hung up, Mark reached for my hand again, and this time, I let myself relax into it. "I'm sorry I scared you," he said. "I never meant for it to look like something it wasn't." "I know," I said. "But from now on, no more surprises that make me question things. Even good surprises." He laughed softly and agreed. Over the next few weeks, we visited the little building together, walked through it slowly, while he pointed out where the workbenches would go, where he imagined a small front counter for customers. The kids came with us one Saturday and got sawdust on their shoes, laughing the whole time. Watching him talk about it, his hands moving as he explained his ideas, I saw a version of my husband I hadn't seen in years, excited, a little nervous, fully alive. 6 months later, on opening day, Hannah stood beside me outside the shop as Mark cut a small ribbon our daughter had tied across the door. Biscuit wore a bandana that said grand opening, which the kids had insisted on. I looked around at the little crowd of neighbors and friends who'd shown up, and I thought about that Tuesday afternoon when Hannah's voice shook on the phone, when I thought my whole world was about to fall apart. In a strange way, it did fall apart, just not the way I'd feared. It fell apart into something better, something honest, something we built together instead of something broken between us. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the people who love you enough to tell you a hard truth are the ones worth keeping close, even when the truth turns out different than you expect.